This channel is only possible thanks to direct contributions from viewers like Kronos, Karazin Magi, Kaleidoscope Mediator, Argus, Milk, Bleed Red, Aria Reed, Christopher Welch, Jacob Sandoval, and you. If you'd like to contribute to making more videos like this possible, you can do so for as little as $1 a month on Patreon. Thanks a bunch, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hey gamers, Taz here, and today we're going to talk about Dave Strider some more. Specifically about how he performs as a knight throughout the beta session. But first we need to discuss his relationship to his denizen, Hephaestus, which means we need a quick mythology recap on the nature of the Homestuck universe. From what we see in the comic, Spurb sessions draw on Greco-Roman mythology and Christian Gnosticism for the names of the denizens. I've gone over these denizens in the past, and I'm sure I will again, but for our purposes, the most important one worth talking about right now is Yaldabaoth, the denizen assigned to both Caliborn and Dirk Strider. Yaldabaoth refers to a Gnostic reinterpretation of the Old Testament god from Christian mythology, which interprets him as a demiurge, typically defined as a god that is either outright evil and corrupt, or in some way incompetent in the act of creating and ruling over reality. Caliborn and one splinter of Dirk end up combined into one such demiurgic entity in the form of Lord English, so the association is useful because it reinforces Lord English's status as essentially the patriarch of the Homestuck pantheon of gods, both in the sense that he literally created the rest of the gods in the cast, and also in the sense that he exerts an absolute control and authority over them. And while it's true that Lord English shares some associations with what we would think of as a tyrannical, corrupt version of the Christian god, what with the association with heteronormativity and misogyny and such, the term demiurge could historically be applied to just about any patriarch of a pantheon in a given mythology. So, for example, through his strong association with Egyptian imagery, we could associate Lord English to the Egyptian god Ra, or lining the role of the demiurge up with the more standard Greco-Roman pantheon that Homestuck already uses, with Zeus, the father of Hephaestus. At least some of the time. In some stories, it seems like Hephaestus is the son of Hera, Zeus's wife, but we're going to roll with Hephi as Zeus's son here, because Dave is ectobiologically Dirk's son, and the basis for Dave's narrative seems to be built at least somewhat around Hephaestus's mythology in relation to Zeus as a father figure. Which brings us to Dirk, or specifically, Bro. Zeus was not particularly kind to Hephaestus. One of the more notable myths between them involves Zeus kicking his son off of Olympus, the fall leaving Hephaestus with a permanent limp. Bro breaking Dave's sword and hobbling his strife specibus can be seen as a mythological echo of the tale, as it leaves Dave metaphorically limping not just with an inefficient weapon, but with a damaging sense of inadequacy and self-loathing. If you want to take a class-spec perspective on it, you could say that Bro has shattered or destroyed Dave's sense of self. This hits me particularly hard, maybe because of the kind of people I think Knight class players tend to be. As far as I can tell, Knights tend to be very selfless and giving individuals, very motivated by what other people think about them. They tend to be hungry for approval and admiration from both their peers and their role models, and that conversely makes them all the more sensitive to dismissal and rejection, which is perhaps why they put up such brave fronts of not caring what other people think. In any case, Hephaestus is the god of the forge, responsible for giving the Olympians their armor and weapons. So we can understand Dave's Hephaestian role as being of service to the gods in general, but in particular to Zeus, and so to Yaldabaoth. By simply growing under Bro's wing and living his life as a Strider, Dave is already essentially acting as an agent for both the wills of Bro himself and Caliborn's vision of how Dave's life should go. but viewing him as an unwitting servant to the wills of the components of Lord English also casts a unique light onto these conversations where he speaks to first Gamzee and then Equius back to back. In these panels, Dave first sends Gamzee the link to the Insane Clown Posse video that awakens Gamzee to the blasphemous truth behind his religion, thus beginning his descent into darkness and his conscious compliance with the Alpha timeline, and then speaks to Equius during the first time he interacts with Caledwelsh, the sword that is apparently Lord English's only weakness. Dave then destroys the sword, which Equius is predictably, pleased by. In the process, Equius and Dave strike up a conversation about the relationship between nobility and strength. Equius assuming that Bro gave Dave some sort of noble upbringing, invoking the association between Bro and the idea of the prince, and then assuming that that training would have endowed in Dave some sort of affinity for destruction, invoking the relationship between the ideas of the prince and destruction in Homestuck. Dave indulges a curious back and forth where he first denies being all that strong, but then declares himself Equius's new king while successfully destroying the Caledwelsh. And when you stop to think about it, Equius could be right. If we see confused 13-year-old Dave as somehow trying to live up to or emulate the image of his big brother, then his habit of accidentally breaking swords could in fact be a subconscious attempt to imitate Bro breaking Dave's own sword. Dave, in essence, participating in a kind of prince roleplay. This idea is supported, I think, by the fact that Dave finds it so relatively easy to destroy all of these legendary swords left and right, but is completely thrown off by the prospect of breaking Bro's sword. His own older brother and father figure reigns supreme in his own mind. His performance as a knight is a lot simpler and a lot healthier when it comes to the rest of his friends, though. Dave's role in Spurb is a direct echo of Hephaestus. It is inherently support-oriented. He's the one who generates the hard cash that lets the other beta kids make all the weapons, outfits, and tools they can dream of without really having to worry about resources. Dave Sprite even gives John Hephaestus' very own divine hammer. He also spends pretty much his whole game helping his friends with their own endeavors, rather than taking any sort of initiative with himself. The first half of his arc is spent running errands on Terezi and then Rose's behalfs. The latter is spent personally assisting Jade's session entry and then frog hunt, thus freeing up John to do his own thing. And the whole thing is capped off with rushing off to save Rose's life, even while she's literally on a suicide mission. That literally describes Dave's entire performance in his session, getting bossed around by girls and doing what they ask him to do. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that to put him down or diminish his contributions. The session would have literally not functioned without him. It's just to point out why I find knights to be such a passive class. Even Dave's single biggest moment to shine, his striking the Jack Norrs and Dirk down in S Collide, happens after he's non-vocally given permission and direction by Dirk, and is as much, if not a bigger character moment for Dirk than for Dave himself. It is arguably a much bigger deal for Dirk to finally allow himself to give up control completely to someone else than it is for Dave to be able to assert his superiority in a contest of strength or manhood or whatever is represented by his ability to break Dirk's sword in the end of Collide there. It's a nice bit of character closure for sure, but it's not really the closure that Dave needed, it's the closure that Dirk needed. The closure that Dave needed was mostly found on the Meteor with Karkat, over long years where they had nothing much to do except just chill out on a couch. The closure that Dave needed was in that peaceful conversation with Dirk on the rooftop, where he was able to open up emotionally and be reassured in turn. All in all, while Dave is Homestuck's alpha male hero, this is a role that's forced on him from the outside, and his narrative victory is in finding ways to wiggle around it for the most part. Next time we touch on the subject of Dave, let's instead focus on his flip side, the other half of his coin, Karkat Bantis, his very own tsundere heroine. See you all next time. Huge thanks go out to my patrons for making this video possible. If you want to help support the channel and come join us at our awesome and growing Discord community, feel free to join us for as little as $1 a month. You can also find me on the r/Hiveswap Reddit and Discord. That's all for now, so thank you again, and as always, keep rising.